in the sprawling metropolis of New Geneva, where humanity's greatest achievements reached toward the stars and alien embassies dotted the skyline like jewels of diplomatic progress, Dr. Elena Vasquez moved through the crowds with the practiced invisibility of someone who had spent 37 years perfecting the art of being unremarkable. Her laboratory coat was always slightly wrinkled, her dark hair pulled back in a utilitarian ponytail, and her glasses perpetually smudged with the residue of late nights spent hunched over quantum processors and neural interface matrices. To her colleagues at the Terran Advanced Research Institute, Elena was the quintessential background researcher. Brilliant, certainly, but lacking the charismatic spark that elevated careers and captured headlines. She published her papers in respectable journals, attended conferences where she sat in middle rows and asked technically precise but unremarkable questions, and returned each evening to her modest apartment where she lived alone with her cat, Newton, and her ever-expanding collection of vintage physics textbooks. What none of them knew, what not even the most sophisticated surveillance systems of the Galactic Council could detect, was that Elena Vasquez had spent the last 15 years systematically destroying every weakness within herself, forging her mind and body into something that would have terrified the very aliens who looked down upon humanity as a charming but ultimately insignificant species. The transformation had begun during her graduate studies when she first encountered the classified reports from humanity's early contact with the Zephyrian Empire. While other humans celebrated the dawn of galactic citizenship, Elena had read between the lines of diplomatic niceties and trade agreements. She saw the condescension in the aliens' technological gifts, the careful limitations placed on human expansion, the subtle but unmistakable hierarchy that placed her species firmly at the bottom of the galactic food chain. It was then that she made a decision that would define the next decade and a half of her life. She would become everything humanity needed to survive, even if it meant destroying everything she had been. The first weakness she eliminated was her need for validation. During her postdoctoral work, she deliberately chose projects that would receive minimal recognition while secretly developing technologies that pushed the boundaries of what aliens believed possible for human science. While her colleagues pursued Nobel Prizes and tenure tracks, Elena pursued perfection in solitude. She studied every piece of available information about alien psychology, physiology, and technology. She learned to speak 17 different galactic languages fluently, and could understand the subtle dialectical variations that revealed the true opinions aliens held about other species. She discovered that the Zephyrians, humanity's primary contact species, considered humans to be emotionally unstable, but occasionally useful for dangerous tasks. The crystalline Vorthan regarded humans as primitive but entertaining. The gas giant-dwelling ethereals found human mortality both fascinating and pitiable. What none of them suspected was that their casual dismissal of human potential was being carefully catalogued and analyzed by a woman who had begun to see patterns that would have made military strategists weep with envy. Elena's second major weakness had been her physical limitations. Growing up as an asthmatic child with poor coordination, she had accepted her role as an intellectual rather than a physical being. But weakness, she learned, was simply another variable to be optimized. She began training in secret, not in gymnasiums where her progress might be observed, but in the abandoned industrial sectors of the city, where humanity's earlier, cruder ambitions had left vast spaces perfect for private development. She learned to move through shadows with the silence of a hunting cat. She studied anatomy with the precision of a surgeon and the intent of an assassin. She trained her body to function on minimal sleep, to process toxins that would incapacitate most humans, and to maintain perfect focus under conditions that would break lesser minds. She learned to kill with her bare hands, with improvised weapons, and with technologies she developed herself. Technologies that alien sensors couldn't detect because they were based on principles that alien science had dismissed as impossible. The third weakness she destroyed was perhaps the most fundamental: her humanity itself, or rather, her attachment to the comfortable illusions that most humans maintained about their place in the galaxy. She spent years in deep meditation, not the peaceful sort that promised enlightenment, but the brutal kind that stripped away every comforting self-deception until only truth remained. She came to understand that humanity's survival would not depend on the goodwill of alien species who viewed them as pets at best and resources at worst. It would depend on humans who could think and act beyond the limitations that aliens had carefully encouraged them to accept. She realized that the very traits aliens found most disturbing about humanity, their unpredictability, their capacity for violence, their refusal to accept permanent hierarchies, were also their greatest advantages. But most importantly, she understood that when the time came for humanity to prove itself worthy of survival, it would not be armies or fleets that made the difference. It would be individuals who had pushed themselves beyond the boundaries of what anyone thought possible, who had become living weapons disguised as ordinary citizens. By day, she continued her unremarkable career as a researcher. Her published work dealt with theoretical applications of quantum mechanics to communications technology, useful but hardly revolutionary by galactic standards. Her apartment remained modest, her social life non-existent, her public persona that of a dedicated but unremarkable scientist. But in the hidden laboratory she had constructed beneath the city's forgotten maintenance tunnels, Elena Vasquez had become something else entirely. She had developed technologies that could slice through alien armor as easily as paper, that could disrupt alien nervous systems with pinpoint precision, that could turn the aliens' own advanced sensors against them. She had trained her body and mind to operate at levels that would have been considered superhuman by the standards of previous generations. She had, in short, become a perfect weapon, hiding in plain sight, waiting for the moment when the galaxy's careful peace would inevitably shatter. That moment came on a Tuesday morning when Elena was reviewing quarterly research reports and drinking her third cup of coffee. The emergency broadcasts began at 10:47 a.m. local time, and within minutes every screen in the institute was displaying the same impossible image. A fleet of ships unlike any in the known databases, emerging from the deep void beyond the galactic rim. The Devourers, as they would come to be known, moved through space with a terrible purpose. Their ships were organic nightmares that seemed to consume light itself, and their first message to the galaxy was delivered not in words but in the systematic annihilation of the Kepler-7 colony world. 30 million beings, humans, Zephyrians, Vorthans, and a dozen other species, simply ceased to exist as the alien ships passed through the system like a plague of mechanical locusts. Within hours, the carefully maintained balance of galactic civilization began to collapse. Trade routes were abandoned as species recalled their fleets for planetary defense. Diplomatic channels filled with increasingly frantic pleas for mutual aid that went largely unanswered as each species looked to its own survival. And in her unremarkable laboratory, Elena Vasquez watched the feeds with the calm satisfaction of someone whose worst predictions were finally being validated. She had always known that the galaxy's peace was an illusion built on the assumption that nothing truly dangerous would ever emerge from the void. Now that assumption lay in ruins, and the careful hierarchies that had kept humanity in its place were crumbling with it. The Devourers were not like the familiar alien species that formed the galactic community. They showed no interest in communication, negotiation, or even conquest in any recognizable form. They simply consumed not just resources or territory, but entire worlds, leaving behind only empty space where civilizations had once thrived. As Elena monitored the alien communications channels, she began to understand the true scope of the crisis. The Zephyrians' vaunted energy shields were useless against weapons that existed partially outside normal space-time. The Vorthans' crystalline technologies shattered at frequencies the Devourers somehow intuited perfectly. The Ethereal's ability to exist in gaseous form provided no protection against entities that could apparently digest matter in any state. One by one, the species that had looked down upon humanity were revealing themselves to be as helpless as children against an enemy that fought by no familiar rules. But Elena had never concerned herself with familiar rules. She had spent 15 years preparing for the moment when all conventional assumptions would prove inadequate, when survival would depend not on following established protocols, but on the ability to adapt, improvise, and transcend every limitation that others accepted as immutable. As the first evacuation orders were issued for the outer colonies, Elena made her way home to her modest apartment and began the process that would transform her from an invisible researcher into humanity's greatest hope for survival. She fed Newton and left him with enough food and water to last several weeks, sent encrypted messages to the few people who might someday understand what she had accomplished, and descended into the hidden laboratory where her true self waited. The woman who emerged 12 hours later looked identical to Dr. Elena Vasquez in every measurable way. But she carried within her mind and body the accumulated knowledge and capabilities of 15 years spent pushing beyond every human limitation. She moved with the fluid grace of someone who had learned to think with her muscles as much as her brain. Her eyes held the calm focus of someone who had stared into the abyss of her own potential and found it deeper than anyone had imagined. She made her way to the spaceport, where the chaotic evacuation was creating opportunities for someone with the right skills and knowledge to acquire transportation off-world. Within 6 hours, she had secured passage on a freight hauler bound for the contested zone where the Devourers were advancing most rapidly. To her fellow passengers, she was just another refugee fleeing the crisis. An unremarkable woman with a small bag and a tendency to find quiet corners where she could work on what appeared to be routine scientific calculations. None of them noticed the way she moved through the ship's corridors with perfect spatial awareness, or how her fingers occasionally traced patterns that corresponded to strike points on alien anatomy, or how she watched the tactical displays with the focused intensity of someone who understood warfare at levels most people never imagined. Elena was no longer invisible because she was unremarkable. She was invisible because she had learned to hide in plain sight while carrying within herself the concentrated fury of a species that had been underestimated for far too long. As the freight hauler jumped to hyperspace, carrying her toward a battle zone where the fate of galactic civilization would be determined, Elena Vasquez allowed herself a small smile. For 15 years, she had systematically destroyed every weakness within herself, forging something that could stand against any enemy. Now, finally, it was time to discover whether humanity's greatest weapon had been worth the sacrifice of everything she had once been. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when someone who had conquered their own limitations was set loose against an enemy that believed no such conquest was possible. Part 2. The Crucible of Revelation. The mining station Prometheus. 7 hung in the void like a dying star, its hull breached in 17 places and its distress beacon painting the surrounding space with desperate red light. Elena's transport had answered the call along with 3 other ships, a Zephyrian medical vessel, a Vorthan escort frigate, and a mixed-species cargo hauler carrying supplies for the outer colonies. What they found defied every tactical manual in the galactic database. The Devourer ship that had attacked Prometheus, Dad. 7 was unlike anything in the previous reports. Where earlier encounters had described organic vessels that consumed matter directly, this creature, for it was clearly a living entity rather than a constructed ship, appeared to feed on something far more fundamental. The mining station's hull wasn't simply destroyed. It was unraveling at the molecular level, as if the basic forces that held matter together were being systematically dismantled. Eleanor watched the rescue operation unfold from the observation deck of her transport, maintaining the careful facade of a concerned researcher while her enhanced senses catalogued every detail of the alien entity's behavior. The Zephyrian medical team moved efficiently through the damaged station, their energy-based technology proving remarkably effective at stabilizing the molecular decay. The Vorthan frigate maintained a careful perimeter, its crystalline hull resonating with defensive frequencies that seemed to slow the creature's approach. But Elena could see what the others missed. The Devourer wasn't attacking the rescue operation because it was studying them. Each species' response to the crisis was being carefully observed and catalogued by an intelligence that was learning to counter their capabilities in real time. The revelation came when the Vorthan frigate adjusted its defensive frequency to maximum resonance, creating a barrier that should have been impenetrable to any known weapon. The Devourer's response was immediate and terrifying. It began to sing. The sound existed somewhere between music and mathematics, a complex harmonic pattern that seemed to reach directly into the crystalline structure of Vorthan technology and turn it against itself. Within seconds, the frigate's hull began to resonate at its natural frequency, building toward a catastrophic failure that would shatter the ship like glass. Elena was moving before conscious thought could interfere with action. Her civilian transport wasn't equipped for combat, but it carried something far more dangerous. A woman who had spent 15 years learning to think like her enemies while fighting like something they couldn't comprehend. She reached the transport's communication array and began transmitting on frequencies that shouldn't have existed, using mathematical principles that conventional science insisted were impossible. The signal she sent wasn't aimed at the Devourer directly. That would have been noticed and counted. Instead, she targeted the quantum foam that permeated space around the creature, introducing subtle fluctuations that would disrupt its harmonic weapon, while appearing to be nothing more than background radiation. The effect was immediate. The Devourer's song faltered, its perfect mathematical precision corrupted by variables it couldn't account for. The Vorthan frigate's hull stabilized, and the creature recoiled in what might have been confusion, or might have been something resembling surprise. But Elena's intervention had been noticed. The Devourer turned its attention toward her transport, and for the first time, Elena found herself looking directly into the eyes of humanity's executioner. They weren't eyes in any biological sense, more like portals into a kind of intelligence that existed beyond the normal constraints of space and time. She felt the weight of that gaze pressing against her mind, probing for weaknesses, cataloging her responses, learning. What it found was something that shouldn't have been possible. Elena had spent years preparing for this moment, not just the tactical confrontation but the psychological one. She had trained her mind to function as a perfect mirror, reflecting back nothing but what an observer expected to see while hiding the true depths beneath layers of carefully constructed deception. The devourer saw a human female marginally more capable than most, but still bound by the fundamental limitations that made her species useful only as servants or resources. It catalogued her intervention as an interesting anomaly but not a significant threat. Its attention turned back to the more obvious dangers presented by the Zephyrian medical technology and Vorthan defensive systems. That was exactly the reaction Elena had designed her response to produce. While the creature focused on cataloging and countering conventional alien technologies, Elena began implementing the second phase of a plan she had been developing for over a decade. Using her transport's apparently harmless scientific equipment, she began mapping the quantum signature of the devourer's consciousness. Every intelligent entity, she had theorized, left traces in the quantum foam, patterns of thought and intention that could be detected if one knew where to look and had the proper equipment. Most researchers had dismissed such theories as philosophical speculation with no practical application. Elena had spent 8 years proving them wrong. As the rescue operation continued around her, she quietly assembled a three-dimensional map of the creature's mind. What she found was both beautiful and terrifying. An intelligence so vast and complex that it existed across multiple dimensions simultaneously, thinking thoughts that spanned entire star systems and planning strategies that operated on geological timescales. But intelligence, no matter how vast, created patterns, and patterns could be disrupted. Elena began the most dangerous part of her plan. Using technology she had developed in absolute secrecy, she started introducing quantum viruses into the creature's consciousness. Not crude attacks that would be immediately detected, but subtle corruptions that would propagate through its neural networks like cancer, turning its own vast intelligence against itself. The process required her to touch the edge of that alien mind with her own consciousness, and what she found there nearly shattered her carefully maintained sanity. The devourer wasn't simply an enemy in any conventional sense. It was the immune system of something even larger and more incomprehensible. A cosmic entity that viewed the entire galaxy as an infection to be cleansed. Elena saw the true scope of the threat in a vision that lasted microseconds but felt like centuries. The galaxy wasn't facing an invasion by hostile aliens. It was facing sterilization by the universe itself. The devourers were antibodies, designed to eliminate the chaotic complexity that intelligent life represented. Every species that had ever reached for the stars, every civilization that had dared to impose order on entropy, was marked for elimination. But in that moment of cosmic revelation, Elena also saw something that the universe's immune system hadn't anticipated. A species so fundamentally chaotic and adaptable that it could evolve even under absolute pressure. Humanity's greatest weakness, their refusal to accept limitations, was also their ultimate strength. The quantum virus took hold in the devourer's consciousness like wildfire in a drought-stricken forest. Elena felt the creature's confusion and mounting alarm as its perfect understanding of local reality began to fragment. Its harmonic weapons stuttered and failed. Its molecular disruptors turned erratic. For the first time in its existence, it experienced something approaching fear. But Elena wasn't finished. As the creature thrashed in quantum agony, she began the final phase of her attack. Using techniques that combined advanced neurology with principles of consciousness transfer, she reached into the devourer's fragmenting mind and began extracting information, species designations, fleet compositions, attack vectors, strategic objectives, the locations of every other devourer unit currently operating in the galaxy, the timing of the next wave of attacks, the position of the cosmic entity that commanded them all. Most importantly, she discovered the one weakness that conventional military analysis had missed. The devourers were individuals, not a hive mind. Each one operated independently, connected to its cosmic master by quantum entanglement that could be disrupted if one understood the mathematical principles involved. Elena downloaded terabytes of tactical intelligence in the span of seconds, burning pathways through her enhanced nervous system that would leave permanent changes to her neural architecture. She felt her consciousness expanding beyond human limits, incorporating alien concepts that had no equivalent in any terrestrial language. And then the creature died, not from her attack. The quantum virus had been designed to incapacitate, not kill. The devourer died because something vast and terrible had reached across the galaxy and terminated it rather than allow its compromised consciousness to be further exploited. Elena felt that cosmic attention turned toward her, and for one terrifying moment she stared directly into the intelligence that had created the devourers. What looked back at her was not malevolent in any human sense. It was simply performing its function, maintaining cosmic order by eliminating chaos. But chaos, Elena realized, was exactly what humanity represented. And for the first time in billions of years, the universe's perfect order was about to encounter a form of chaos it couldn't simply erase. The cosmic attention withdrew, leaving behind only the wreckage of the mining station and 4 rescue ships whose crews had no idea that they had just witnessed the first human victory in a war for the survival of intelligent life itself. Elena quietly deleted all records of her quantum interventions from the transport's computer systems and returned to her role as a concerned researcher. But the intelligence she had extracted from the dying devourer burned in her enhanced memory like a star going nova, and she knew that her invisible war had only just begun. As the rescue fleet prepared to return to civilized space, Elena composed the first of what would become a series of carefully encoded messages to certain individuals scattered across human space. Scientists, soldiers, engineers, and philosophers who had the potential to understand what was coming and the courage to do what would be necessary. The galaxy's governments would continue to fight the devourers using conventional tactics that couldn't succeed. They would form alliances based on assumptions that no longer applied. They would debate strategies that addressed symptoms while ignoring the underlying disease. But humanity would fight a different war. Entirely. They would fight with weapons that existed in the spaces between conventional reality, using tactics based on principles that alien science considered impossible. They would become something that the universe's immune system couldn't recognize or counter. And when the final battle came, when every conventional defense had failed and the galaxy stood on the brink of sterilization, it would be humans who turned the tide. Humans who had learned to be more than the sum of their limitations, led by a woman who had destroyed every weakness within herself, to become something that even cosmic intelligences couldn't fully comprehend. The invisible war had begun, and Elena Vasquez was no longer fighting alone. Part 3. The weapon unveiled. 6 months after the Prometheus 7 incident, the war had consumed half the galaxy. The devourer of fleets moved through space like a plague of living entropy, unraveling the fundamental structures that held matter together and leaving behind only void where civilizations had once flourished. The great powers of the galactic community, the Zephyrian Empire with its energy weapons, the Vorphan crystalline houses with their reality-shaping technologies, the ethereal void dancers with their mastery over dark matter, had all fallen before an enemy that seemed to exist beyond the laws of physics they understood. Eleanor watched the collapse from the command center of Research Station Archimedes, a supposedly civilian facility orbiting a neutron star in the galactic core where she had been quietly assembling the components of humanity's response. To outside observers, Archimedes was conducting theoretical research into quantum consciousness. Interesting, but ultimately impractical work that posed no threat to anyone. In reality, Elena had turned the station into a forge for weapons that could wound gods. The team she had assembled over the past months looked unremarkable by conventional standards. Dr. Marcus Chen was a failed physicist whose theories about multidimensional consciousness had been dismissed by the academic community. Lieutenant Sarah Morrison was a disgraced military officer whose tactical innovations had been deemed too erratic for conventional warfare. Engineer Pavel Kowalski had been blacklisted from major corporations for his refusal to accept the limitations of human technology. Each of them had been chosen not for their achievements, but for their failures. Failures that had occurred when they tried to push beyond boundaries that others considered immutable. Elena had recognized in their discarded theories and rejected innovations the seeds of something that could challenge the universe itself. The breakthrough came when Dr. Chen finally solved the consciousness transfer equations that Elena had been developing for 15 years. His breakthrough wasn't based on conventional neuroscience, but on the radical premise that consciousness existed as a fundamental force of nature, like gravity or electromagnetism, but operating in dimensions that conventional science couldn't access. The devourers aren't just biological entities, Chen explained to the assembled team as data streams flowed across the holographic displays around them. They're consciousness given physical form, which is why conventional weapons can't affect them meaningfully. You can't kill an idea with bullets or energy beams. Lieutenant Morrison leaned forward, studying the tactical implications with the focused intensity of someone who had spent her career thinking about problems no one else wanted to solve. But if consciousness is a fundamental force, then it can be manipulated using the right techniques. We're not fighting biological entities, we're fighting living concepts that happen to have physical manifestations. Engineer Kowalski nodded grimly as he reviewed the technical specifications Elena had extracted from the dying devourer. Their entire existence is based on quantum entanglement with whatever cosmic intelligence created them. They don't think independently. They're extensions of a single vast mind operating across multiple dimensions. But entanglement can be disrupted if you understand the mathematical principles involved. Elena felt a familiar surge of satisfaction as her carefully chosen team began to grasp the true nature of their enemy. She had spent months leading them through increasingly complex theoretical exercises, never revealing that she already knew the answers they were struggling to discover. It was crucial that they reach these conclusions independently, that they truly understand what they would be asked to do, because what she intended to ask of them would transform them as fundamentally as she had transformed herself. The quantum virus I introduced at Prometheus 7 proved that devourer consciousness can be disrupted, Elena said, calling up the carefully edited recordings of her encounter with the creature. But that was a crude attack that only worked because the target wasn't expecting resistance from a human source. The cosmic intelligence controlling them has adapted its defenses since then. She gestured, and the display shifted to show a real-time map of the galaxy. Red zones marked areas where devourer fleets had already passed, leaving behind empty space. Yellow zones indicated active battlefields where conventional forces were still fighting hopeless rearguard actions. The tiny islands of green that remained represented the last refuges of galactic civilization. Every conventional strategy has failed, Elena continued. Energy weapons are absorbed and redirected. Physical projectiles are unraveled at the molecular level. Defensive shields are turned into weapons against their own operators. The enemy learns and adapts faster than any conventional military force can respond. Dr. Chen studied the tactical displays with growing understanding. You're proposing something beyond conventional warfare entirely, aren't you? Not just new weapons, but a new category of conflict. Exactly, Elena confirmed. We're going to fight a war in conceptual space, not just against the devourer's physical forms, but against the ideas that give them existence. We're going to become viral concepts ourselves, designed to propagate through their consciousness networks and corrupt them from within. Lieutenant Morrison was quiet for a long moment, working through the implications. You're talking about transforming human consciousness itself, making us into living weapons that can operate in dimensions where physical laws are negotiable. Pavel Kowalski looked up from his engineering calculations with an expression of awe and terror. The technical requirements alone would be staggering. We'd need to quantum entangle our own consciousness with the fundamental forces of reality. The changes to human neural architecture would be permanent. Yes, Elena said simply, and irreversible. Once we take this path, we can never go back to being purely human. We'll become something new, something that exists partially outside normal space-time, something that can think and fight in dimensions that conventional consciousness can't access. The silence that followed was profound. Each member of the team understood that they were being offered a choice that would define not just their own futures but the entire trajectory of human evolution. They could remain safely human and watch the galaxy die, or they could sacrifice everything they had been to become something that might be able to save it. Dr. Chen was the first to speak. I've spent my entire career studying the boundaries of human consciousness. If there's a chance to transcend those boundaries and save intelligent life from extinction, I have to take it. Lieutenant Morrison nodded slowly. Military service is supposed to be about protecting something larger than yourself. I can't think of a larger cause than the survival of consciousness itself in the universe. Engineer Kowalski's response was characteristically practical. The technical challenges are enormous, but the theoretical foundations are sound. If anyone can build the equipment needed for this transformation, we can. Elena felt something inside her relax that had been tense for months. She had been prepared to undertake the mission alone if necessary, but having allies who truly understood the stakes would make success far more likely. Over the following weeks, Research Station Archimedes became a laboratory for the impossible. Using principles that conventional science insisted were purely theoretical, They began constructing devices that could map human consciousness in 11 dimensions, equipment that could quantum entangle biological neural networks with cosmic force fields, and weapons that existed primarily as mathematical concepts given temporary physical form. The transformation process itself was agonizing beyond anything Elena had experienced in 15 years of systematically destroying her limitations. It required conscious dissolution of the barriers that separated individual consciousness from universal concepts, allowing cosmic forces to flow directly through human neural pathways that had never evolved to handle such energies. Elena went first, as she had always known she would. The process took 18 hours and left her fundamentally changed at levels that extended far beyond the merely physical. Her consciousness now existed simultaneously in normal space-time and in the quantum dimensions where the Devourers operated. She could think in mathematical concepts that had no human equivalent and perceive patterns of causality that spanned galaxies. But she was still Elena Vasquez, still the woman who had chosen to destroy her weaknesses rather than accept them. Still human enough to remember what she was fighting to protect. Dr. Chen's transformation focused on expanding his consciousness to encompass multiple parallel probability streams simultaneously. Lieutenant Morrison's enhancement allowed her to perceive tactical situations across 11 dimensions at once. Engineer Kowalski's modification gave him the ability to manipulate matter at the quantum level through direct mental interface. When the process was complete, they were no longer quite human. But there was something unprecedented in the galaxy's history. Biological entities that could operate as equals in the cosmic arena where the Devourer's true battles were fought. The test came when a Devourer fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the neutron star system, drawn by quantum signatures that shouldn't have been possible to detect. 3 massive entities that existed as much in conceptual space as physical reality, each one capable of unraveling entire worlds. Elena and her team met them in the space between dimensions, where thoughts had mass and intentions could alter the fundamental constants of physics. The battle that followed couldn't be adequately described in any human language, because it was fought with weapons of living mathematics against enemies whose very existence was an assault on ordered reality. Elena struck at the lead Devourer's consciousness with viral concepts designed to propagate through quantum-entangled networks, turning the creature's vast intelligence against itself. Dr. Chen attacked across multiple probability streams simultaneously, creating paradoxes that forced the enemy to exist in contradictory states. Lieutenant Morrison coordinated tactical maneuvers that operated in 11 dimensions at once, striking from angles that conventional geometry couldn't accommodate. Engineer Kowalski rebuilt reality itself around the battle zone, altering local physics to favor human consciousness over cosmic order. The Devourers fought back with weapons that unmade matter and energies that could erase concepts from existence. But for the first time since the war began, they faced opponents who understood that consciousness itself was the ultimate battlefield, entities who could think and fight at their own level. When the battle ended, 2 of the 3 Devourers were dead, not just destroyed, but conceptually nullified, their patterns of existence deleted from the quantum foam itself. The 3rd had fled back to whatever cosmic realm had spawned them, carrying with it the unprecedented knowledge that the galaxy had produced defenders who could challenge the universe's immune system on its own terms. Elena felt the cosmic intelligence that controlled the Devourers turning its full attention toward Earth's star system for the first time, and she smiled with the calm satisfaction of someone whose deepest plans were finally coming to fruition. The invisible war was over. The real war was about to begin. Across human space, carefully prepared individuals began receiving activation codes that would trigger transformations Elena had been designing for over a decade. Scientists, soldiers, engineers, philosophers, artists, and dreamers, all of them people who had been quietly prepared for this moment, who had the potential to become something that could stand against cosmic forces. Humanity's greatest strength had always been its refusal to accept limitations that others considered permanent. Now, finally, they would discover just how far that refusal could take them. The galaxy was about to learn that evolution didn't stop with biology, that consciousness itself could be weaponized, and that a species willing to transcend its own nature could become something that even the universe's immune system couldn't easily eliminate. Elena Vasquez stood at the observation deck of Research Station Archimedes, watching the stars with eyes that could now perceive the quantum threads connecting all conscious entities across space and time. She was no longer the invisible researcher who had spent 15 years destroying her weaknesses. She was no longer entirely human. She was something new, something unprecedented, something that the cosmos would have to account for in all its future calculations. And she was not alone. The man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others, she reflected, watching the first wave of transformed humans begin their journey toward the galactic core, where the final battle would determine whether consciousness would survive in the universe or be sterilized by forces that valued order above all else. The weak Elena Vasquez was dead, destroyed by her own hand years ago. What remained was a living weapon disguised as a woman, a consciousness that had learned to operate beyond the boundaries of physics, a human being who had chosen to become something that could save her species by transcending everything that species had been. The invisible had become visible. The battle footage that would soon spread across the galaxy would show the universe a new kind of warrior, one that fought not just with superior technology, but with the fundamental forces of consciousness itself. And in research stations, military bases, and hidden laboratories across human space, others were beginning their own transformations. Following the path Elena had blazed through 15 years of systematic self-destruction and reconstruction, humanity's greatest war was about to begin, fought by humans who had learned to be more than human, led by a woman who had discovered that the ultimate weapon against cosmic forces was consciousness that refused to accept its limitations. The galaxy would never be the same, neither would Elena Vasquez, and that, she thought with grim satisfaction, was exactly the point. In the end, the greatest victory is not over external enemies, but over the limitations we accept within ourselves. For when we destroy our weak selves, we become something that no external force can destroy. We become inevitable.